Moving through the book of James, and last week Steve started the chapter 3 of James and took us through a great word on the power of the tongue and how our words can be used to build up or tear down, and how this strange thing happens that out of the same mouth that can bring blessing can also bring cursing. And it was right out of this discussion that James has that he launches into the topic that we're going to talk about today. And he starts it with a question. You ready for the question? Yeah. I love it. He says, "Who is wise and understanding among you?" Who is wise and understanding among you? Is it the person on your right? Do you think they're wise? Take a look. Maybe. Person on your left? Absolutely. Person up front teaching today? Debatable. I don't know. You can let me know at the end. But he says, who is understanding and wise among you? And the question is, how can you tell? How can you tell if someone's wise or understanding? I know when I think about and I consider who might be wise or understanding, I usually think of a good listener who listens more than they speak, someone who's very thoughtful, someone who is an expert at whatever I'm maybe talking to them about, so that they have experience, someone who's maybe not too hasty or impulsive. So those are some of the things. You might have a few other attributes that come to mind for you. But I kid you not, probably at the time in my life where I have never sought out wisdom as much as I did, and this won't maybe come as a surprise to you, but the last few years, 2023 and 2024, I had never been at such a desperate need for God to give me wisdom and understanding. As you know, our church was going through a lot of transition. We had dealt with some heartbreak. And so not only me, but our staff and our elders and even you, all of us were going through this uncharted territory. And I just found myself constantly saying, God, what do I do? What's the wise thing to do here? And I would reach out. I had about 5 different people on rotation on speed dial. No kidding. All over the country, who I'd pick up and say, I need to talk. Can you, just listen for a second. Here's what's going on. And it would be leaders or pastors or executives or coaches or just people that were in my corner, that were Team Jesus, that were Team Church. And we're like, we're going to walk with you through this. And our staff team was that, and our board was that, and you were that. And together we made it through a very challenging time. You know, I can laugh about it now, but there'd be so many times where I pick up the phone and I say, we can't make this up, you know? But this happened, so now what do we do? And there would be times, I can think of 2 times, there were more, but I'd say, okay, this is what I'm thinking, and the person on the other side would say, I wouldn't say that. I said, no? I said, no. I'd maybe change that up a little bit or leave that out. And so I'd heed their wisdom, and I'd be like, you're right. I probably shouldn't say that, but it's important. Sometimes we need to lean on other people to help us see things we can't see, or to help us see when we're getting in the way. Now, I wish in the last few years that I had done about 20 hours of study in this passage, because this would have been really helpful to me. And it would have been nice to have James on speed dial. And he probably would have been able to empathize in many ways, because as a little bit of a refresher, remember James, when he's writing this letter, is the leader of the church in Jerusalem at the time. The church is learning a whole new way of following the crucified, risen Jesus. And you can better believe that there's a lot of stuff that they have to deal with and talk through and navigate that they had never experienced before. And they're leaning on James for the wisdom to do that. And so he is helping the church navigate. And this letter is going out to the dispersed Jews that have traveled all over the region because of persecution and suffering, and he wants to give them encouragement. And so he's probably, well, I don't know, I'm guessing, writing this letter and thinking, I should probably put something in here about wisdom and understanding for what our church is going through right now. And so he does. And he cares so much about them living out their faith. And a theme we see constantly is, don't tell me, show me. A faith is active. And so if you want to turn in your Bibles to James chapter 3, we're going to pick up in verse 13 when he asked them this question, who is wise and understanding among you? And then he answers it this way. He says, let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. What does he not say here? He doesn't say, hey, for all of you who've memorized the entire book of Proverbs, from Solomon, who we so respect and revere. No, he didn't say that. He didn't say, quoting the famous philosophers of the day, can you do that? Or, you're a great teacher, you're probably wise, you're seasoned. He didn't say if you're able to say the most profound thing at the moment to somebody who needs it. No, what does he say? He says, if you consider yourself wise and understanding, show me. Prove it. And prove it by how? Your honorable life, by your good deeds, which is right on brand for the theme in his book. It's constantly about demonstration of your faith. So he says, don't just show me. And then he says, well, show me how? Show me with humility. Show me that way. Let's start there. Now, what's fascinating about this word humility, and I spent a lot of time looking at this, is because there's so many nuances of this word, and actually in some versions, which you might be reading today, is translated meekness or gentleness. And so when you look at the root word, the Greek word praus or praotes, which is what this word is, it's kind of like this blend of gentleness, humility, and meekness all in one. But for the sake of a version, they had to pick one. So the word here is praus, and it means strength under control, very simply. There's a lot of other words you could use, but I'm trying to make it the most simple. Strength under control. And like I said, it can also be translated meek or gentle. Now, as I looked into this word even more, so many commentators kept bringing up this example using horses. And you're like, horses? You didn't know you'd see some beautiful pictures of horses this morning. But in ancient times, the Greeks would train wild horses to become war horses, to become horses that they would take into battle. But they couldn't take a wild horse. Why? Because it'd be all over the place. It wouldn't do what they would need it to do. It wouldn't be able to engage when they said engage. And it would be rebellious. And just imagine a wild stallion. You can't take that into sensitive, delicate, hard situations. So they would train the wild horse. They would train the horse to be able to listen to its leader, to be able to harness its power, to bridle its strength. It wouldn't take away the power from the horse or the strength from the horse, but it would teach the horse to yield, to submit, to respond, to be teachable, to be trainable. And when the wild horse was fully trained, it was considered to be meeked. That was a word. The horse would be considered to be praus, meeked, when it was fully trained. Why? Because it was able to demonstrate a strength that was under control. So the most gentle nudge of the rider, or a simple sound, the master could signal the horse to respond, to either charge or to stand its ground. Pretty cool, huh? So when the horse was ready and when it was equipped, it would be meeked. It would be able to be completely at rest when it needed to be. It'd also be able to completely engage and use all of its strength and power when it would need to be in battle. Another definition I want to offer that kind of helped me think about this word meekness is actually from Aristotle, okay, a Greek philosopher. Now, I don't even know if I've ever read Aristotle in my life, but he just kept coming up so many times, and he had something I thought very profound about this word praus, and he said, a praus person has the virtue of the mean, the average, between two extremes. So a way to think about it is balanced, centered, living in the tension. And he would say, take anger, for instance. Not excessive anger, not passivity, right in the middle. Meekness. It's the balance, it's the average, it's living in the centered, living in the tension of the two extreme qualities that you probably don't want to have. So if you respond meekly, you respond with the right amount of anger at the right time at the right person, for example, is what he was saying. Or you could take extreme carelessness on this side or cowardice on this side, and the middle ground would be courage, the virtue. Centered, balanced. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about this meekness of wisdom. And the other important piece about this word is it always implies done for the good of other people, for the sake of others. It's a quality, it's a virtue that's demonstrated always in consideration of other people. So let's go back to the first verse that we're studying today. Still in that first verse, chapter 3, verse 13. He said, let him show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility or the what? The meekness, the prautes that comes from wisdom. He said, you want to be considered wise and understanding? Let me see it by your noble life. By wisdom that's harnessed in strength, that's under control, that's balanced. Let me see it by how you put others first, by how you consider the good of other people when you make your decisions. So if we think about a key idea for today, true wisdom lives humbly for the good of others. Now you can imagine I was like, use humble, use meek, use gentle, blend the three together. But for the sake of a key idea, humility, but knowing there's way more to that word, as we have discussed today. Now some of you might want something a little more punchy and a little more brief. So how about this? Get meeked and do good. That's it. If you leave today and you're like, I'm going to get meek and do good. Now, that's not something that we can manufacture, which we're going to continue to talk about. But I think at the heart of wisdom is this idea of meekness and this idea of always thinking for the benefit and the good of other people. Out of this first verse of James talking about wisdom and understanding, he then takes us through a discussion of like the opposite qualities of what we're looking for, as well as some other helpful characteristics that help us think about it a little bit more. So let's continue on in verse 14. And he starts with some vices. Verse 14, he says, but if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly. It's unspiritual, and it is demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. So notice that James mentions two qualities here: bitter envy and selfish ambition. And he's like, and if these are two things that you have, don't make it worse and boast about it, or deny that that's true of your heart. So bitter envy, harsh jealousy, wanting what you don't have. It can produce, think about, what does envy produce? Anxiety, obsessive thoughts, leads to arguments, anger. It robs us of joy. We're never satisfied. Selfish ambition. It's not saying ambition is bad, but when you make ambition all about yourself and getting ahead. And the word here that I thought was really fascinating translated is having a party spirit. Now, I'm not talking about party, a good time, drinks, food, balloons. No. This means like I'm on this side, you're on this side. A party spirit. Selfish rivalry. We see a little bit of that in our world today, don't we? To put it lightly. Selfish ambition, a party spirit, competitive, advancing your own interest, doing whatever it takes to get ahead. We might think it leads to our happiness, but it won't. It'll leave us empty, and it will leave a trail of burned relationships in the background. So he's saying, hey, if this is true about you, the source of that is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. And you might say, wow, James, that's pretty strong. Like, aren't these kind of like JV sins, like maybe not as bad as some of the other ones? But he's saying, no, this is weighty. You let this thing go unchecked. It's the source of the enemy, of the devil, of darkness. And he kind of alludes here, if you remember in John, when he's writing about the three enemies of the soul, he writes about the world, the flesh, and the devil. These are three things that are always trying to sell you something and underdeliver. The temptations of your soul. The world will do it, your own flesh will do it, and then the devil will do it. Three different ways you can get bombarded and deceived. And he's likening the source of selfish ambition and bitter envy to that which is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. He doesn't mince words here. And he's like, it's not going to go well with you. It will erode your soul. And it will tell you a lie. It says, hey, I deserve this, so I'm going to go for it. And the world will tell you, just do whatever makes you happy. We hear that all the time. Just do whatever you need to do to make you happy. This isn't the message that James gives us today about wisdom. But selfish ambition and bitter envy lead to the spirit of entitlement, and they can become divisive. We'll find we manipulate, we obsess, and like I said, nothing good comes from these. We might think it'll make us feel important, because somehow deep down we think it's serving us somehow, makes us feel loved or successful, but ultimately it won't do that. So before I move on, let me just ask this question. Where are we envious? Where have our ambitions maybe become all about us? Where have our desires become unchecked and disordered? Desires are good, but have they been taken too far and turned into envy and ambition? Selfish ambition. I just came up with a list of things sometimes that, we just want better. I wish I had that bigger house. I wish I had those better in-laws. I wish I had a loving marriage. I wish I had kids that actually behaved. Do you know how much time I put into this? And those people over there are horrible parents, but their kids turned out good. And all this comparison, or, maybe you're at a retired age and you're like, all my friends have grandkids and I don't. And you want to compare, oh, he got into that school, I didn't get into that school, I worked harder, why didn't I? They have the better job. I've worked hard, I should deserve it. Why isn't my home a place of peace? Why can't I take that vacation? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Or we just barrel over people, or we look at people and just want them to serve whatever we need. Become opportunistic. That's a hard one to say. Do we sense that in our own hearts? Have our priorities and our values suffered because we're starting to compromise in ways we never thought we would? Because we just want what we want. And is God even involved in any of this? Have we included him in? Or have we just moved ahead and said, God, I'll take it from here. I got this one. In essence, you don't quite know what you're doing. I know for me, this topic of envy, to be transparent, especially in I'd probably say the last year. So some of you, I don't know if you keep in contact with friends you made in college or high school, okay? But years and years later, it's interesting to see how people's lives turn out, And you remember the conversations you had with your classmates. And you remember the dreams that you had and the things you'd hope would happen in your life. And then 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, 50 years later, 60? All right, Joanne. And you start comparing, you're like, hey, how did they get that? That's what I wanted. I won't go into all the scenarios, but we do that, don't we? And what I realized, what God helped me realize about my own heart, is that it was even getting in the way of me staying in connection with some of them, because I realized it was just hard to talk about life with some of them because of me having envy over some of the things that they were able to do or receive or experience that I'm either waiting for or never got or never happened for me. And I remember the minute when it kind of hit me of like, oh, Lisa, maybe you have a problem with envy. Maybe this is something that's not something to just kind of turn your eyes from or shove under the rug. Maybe it's something that God really needs to come in and heal your heart. Maybe it's something you need to confess and give over and ask for God's perspective. As if someone else's happiness or goodness will take away from our own. Is God really that small? Is God really that, limited in his ability to extend his goodness to us and other people? So it's something that has really hit close to home to me, and I continue to bring that before God and say, God, I don't want to live that way. And especially when you get on social media, that's not helpful at all. If you're trying to overcome sin of selfish ambition and bitter envy, that might not be the place to do it. It's a breeding ground for that. So before we moved on, I just wanted to help us sit in that place a little bit. And James is saying, hey, if you want to live a life of wisdom, you got to get rid of those sins in your heart, those enemies of the soul. They'll take you out so fast. In my haste, I moved ahead of verse 16, but he says this, for where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you have disorder and every evil practice. Disorder, instability, chaos. He says that's where it's going to lead. Well, let's move on to verse 17. This is when kind of the good news comes. Verse 17, he says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all, what? Pure. It's first of all pure. Before you move on any further, the wisdom that God gives us will always be pure. It will be uncontaminated. It will be holy. It will be the purest, best of motivations. It's first of all pure. Everything will flow out of that. He said then it's peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, good fruit, impartial, and sincere. What a list. He said, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Now, what do these have in common? I loved one of the phrases I read this week, that they are community-preserving virtues. Think about that. Every single one of these words that James uses helps a community of people be unified, to do good to one another, to live in harmony with one another, or at least try. So we look at this list and it's a little daunting, isn't it? You're like, man, if that's what wisdom is, I got a long ways to go. But let's sit with this list a little bit. After pure, he goes to peace-loving. What? It's a disposition to want to be in right relationship with people, to want to get along with other people. Considerate, always taking other people into account and their interests. Submissive, that's a hard one these days. Well, Lisa, aren't there some things that you never compromise on? Well, yes, there are. But we could probably go a long way to be a little more adaptable and flexible and yielding to other people's desires and interests than maybe sometimes we are. To bend a little more, to give a little more than sometimes we might be comfortable with. Full of mercy. He says it's full of mercy. It's not about giving people what you think they deserve. It's about helping alleviate the pain or suffering they might be in. He says it's good fruit. It brings good outcomes. It brings good results. You will see it by the product that it yields. It's impartial. And we've already had a great message on that, on favoritism. James kind of covered that already pretty well in his book, but we're circling back around to it. Must have been a problem in that early church, huh? And sincere. It doesn't pretend. It's not hypocritical. How it acts follows what it says. I love how Eugene Peterson, translated this in his Message translation, and I wanted to read that to you. He says, real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with others. It is gentle and reasonable, overflowing with mercy and blessings, not hot one day and cold the next, not two-faced. He said, you can develop a healthy, robust community that lives right with God and enjoys its results only if you do the hard work of getting along with each other and treating each other with dignity and honor. You live this way, that is a wise way to live. That is a way to live that is full of the meekness of wisdom. And James was saying, and the opposite of that is living self-serving, self-focused. But this way is a wise way of living. I mentioned earlier that James was writing this as the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And one of his roles while he was leader of the church was to also head up the Council of Jerusalem, and we actually read about that in Acts 15. Now, most likely, this book was written before this event happened in Acts, but it does give you a little bit of a maybe a perspective of understanding of how deeply James believed in this approach to wisdom by how he handles a delicate situation in the church. So I thought I would just kind of revisit this brief story with you to show you how James handled something that was provoking great conflict at the time within the people of God. I'm not going to read all of it. I'll summarize most of it, but it's in Acts 15. And so where we're at in the beginning of the church is there's these believers in Antioch, and they were teaching this teaching to the Gentiles, which were non-Jews, so not in the house of faith yet. And they were telling them, hey, you can't be saved. You can't follow Jesus. You can't be in the family of God unless you're circumcised, because that's what our prophet Moses taught, and that was the custom that we've done this whole time. And so if you're not, you're out. And it was starting to breed a lot of conflict in the church, so much so that they gave word to Paul and Barnabas and said, we got a problem. We gotta fix this. And so Paul and Barnabas said, okay, we're going to go to Jerusalem, and we're going to talk to the elders and the apostles, and we're going to discuss this, and we're going to figure this out. So they go and they make the trip, and they're all talking together. And I love this. In verse 5 of Acts 15, it says, then some of the believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees, look at that, remember the party spirit we talked about? Who belonged to the party of the Pharisees, the religious folks, stood up and said, the Gentiles must be circumcised and required to keep the law of Moses. So that's the side they're on. They made their case. And then what happens? Peter gets up and he addresses the crowd. And he says, brothers, you know that some time ago God made a choice among you that the Gentiles might hear from my lips the message of the gospel and believe. God, who knows the heart, showed that he accepted them by giving the Holy Spirit to them, just as he did to us. He didn't discriminate. There it is, no partiality. He didn't discriminate between us and them, for he purified their hearts by what? By faith. Now then, why do you try to test God by putting on the necks of Gentiles a yoke that neither we nor our ancestors were able to bear? That's what Peter gets up to say. You're like, well done, Peter. He sits down. Some more conversation happens. And then, who gets up? James gets up. James, our boy James, we're talking about. He gets up. And he says, brothers, listen to me. Peter has described to us how God has intervened to choose a people for his name from the Gentiles. And then he goes on to quote a prophet, and I won't read that. And then in verse 19, he says this, it is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Instead, we should write to them, telling them to abstain from, and then he gives a few things that he says, but this might be good for you to keep. Abstain from food polluted to idols. Why? Because they were in pagan worship. That probably wouldn't be a good idea. From sexual immorality. Remember, we're wanting to have a good, thriving, healthy community, so it might be good to not do the sexual ethics that you were before. And refrain from the meat of strangled animals and from blood. Now I thought, why does that even matter? Well, when they're having their potlucks, no, actually serious, like around food and building community, it was important maybe to align with some of this. And plus, like that food was an indication of former pagan worship. And he's like, no, let's refrain from that. So don't do that. I kind of laughed about this because would it today be, instead of gluten-free and wheat-free and sugar-free, it'd be blood-free, idol-free, strangled animal-free. I thought that was funny. He's like, let's, abstain from that. But anyway, so James gets up and he gives this brilliant, wise word and said, we shouldn't make it too hard. They're invited in the family of God because remember, it is by faith and it's not by this custom of Moses. So, was it pure? Was it peace-loving? Was it considerate? Was it full of mercy? Was it for the good of the Gentiles? Yes. And he used his power to what? Provoke freedom and equality for the people. He was a peacemaker. He was willing to step into the fray and to work it out when something was really difficult and conflicting in the church. And so in verse 18, we read, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. It's going to produce a harvest of being in right relationship with people and right relationship with God when you make the effort of pursuing peace with other people. And remember, he's writing in this first century, Greco-Roman society, and honor was huge, and status was huge, and power was huge, and knowledge, and all these things. But he's saying, no. We live in a different kingdom, and meekness is the virtue that we're looking for here. It is the kingdom ethic that is worthy of our life. To be a kingdom community that follows in the footsteps of the crucified Lord who lived this way and demonstrated his life in the way we ought to live. In preparation for today, I thought, maybe I'll tell a story about, some great historical figures like Rosa Parks for her quiet strength and courage in the civil rights movement, or Hudson Taylor, this amazing missionary in China who didn't retaliate or demand restitution. And then I thought, we don't really live there. They would be inspiring and compelling stories, but where do we live? We live at our dining room tables. We live in the cubicle at the office. We live in here Sunday mornings. We live on the baseball field. We live in our schools, in the locker rooms. That's where life happens. Life happens in the drive-thru at Walgreens. That's where it happened for me one day, where my meekness was tested and I failed. I was driving up to get a prescription filled that I was told was filled, and I get there, and she's like, I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you come back in 15 minutes? Okay. Do the little loop-de-loop, go waste some time, come back. And I said, hi, I'm Lisa. Could I have my prescription? I'm sorry, ma'am. Well, wait a second. Oh, we got it. She pulls it out. We're talking about it. She confirms the prescription, and then I realize, wait a second, something's off. And she's like, I don't know. And she's like, she's typing in her computer. She's trying to figure out how many pills are in there. By this time, my patience is waning because I've already done the loop once. And then this is when it gets bad, because now she's starting to talk about the number of pills in there and how much it costs and how many days. So now I'm starting to do math, and I'm thinking, lady, don't do math with me. I'll win. And I just noticed, and I'm thinking, this isn't good, Lisa. It's just Walgreens Pharmacy. And I said, ma'am, are there 45 pills in there? Yes. Is my name on that bottle? Yes. Can I just have my pills? Can we just do this? Can I pay you? She's like, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to refill it because it was filled wrong, and I did not understand, but there was some policy that would be broken if she gave me my pills because it wasn't filled properly. I agree. And so I know on my face, and I know in my tone, it was not the right amount of anger at the right time at the right person. There was some extremes going on, and I wasn't exhibiting the balanced virtue of meekness in the moment. So what else was she says, could you come back in 15 minutes? I said, ma'am, I can't come back. I was on my way somewhere that I was now late to, and so I drove away. And right as I drove, I thought, I could have handled that better. God, I'm sorry. I didn't need to be a jerk. It's just pills. Poor Walgreens lady. It wasn't her fault. So the next day, drive up to the drive-thru, and I said, Lord, okay, if the lady's the same one and she's working, give me an opportunity just to make this right. Sure enough, it was her. I'm like, great. And I just said, ma'am, hi, it's me again. I said, I'm really sorry about yesterday. I don't know if you remember me, but I could have handled that better. Oh, no, it's okay. I said, no, actually it wasn't. I said, it wasn't your fault. Well, no, and she kept trying to send it, and she was cool. She says, it's all right. But I felt horrible. I'm like, no, I shouldn't have treated you that way. But we do, don't we? We get tested in everyday moments like Walgreens pharmacy, and we respond in ways that don't exhibit the true wisdom that lives in humility for the good of others that we're talking about today. So, what's our choice? What's our response to this message? Well, I love the invitation of Jesus when he says this. He says, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. The only way that we're going to be able to grow in this kind of wisdom that James is talking about is for us to learn from the one who demonstrated it the best. And notice, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but in the Gospels, Jesus only self-identifies two qualities to himself the entire time. And it's this verse. When he says, I'm gentle and humble. He talks about himself metaphorically, living water, bread of life. But the qualities he chooses to self-identify is gentle and humble in heart, praus. That's how Jesus talks about himself. There are so many things, or people, podcasts, good books, stuff that we can learn from to be wise. I've lately been listening to a lot of Jefferson Fisher. I don't know if you've heard of him, but I think he's a wise communicator and helps people think about how to communicate more effectively. I'd consider him actually a meek communicator. But I don't want to be a disciple of Jefferson Fisher. I want to be a disciple of Jesus. So what does that look like? What are some steps that we can take? Because it's not just about, you could memorize this verse, but I doubt it's going to really change you deep down, right? It needs to be practiced. It needs to be lived out. It needs to be in dependence on the Holy Spirit. So I just came up with a few ideas for our week, okay? And maybe you could choose one. Contemplate the life of Jesus. You want to learn about how to live in a way that's humble and meek? Read stories about Jesus. Meditate on those stories. Think about it. Put yourself, try to, in his shoes. And the more you let that kind of marinate, the more that you can just see, wow, this is who I want to become like. And I know this is audacious, but embrace the trial. There's something that you're going through. Trials teach us. They teach us they can be divine instruments that strip us of what? Self-protection and control. Help us to rest in God's providence and love for us. Here's one: practice submission. Actually, try to defer. Practice saying, you know what, we'll do it your way. Find something this week that you can do that. Exhibit some compromise. Or practice secret acts of kindness. Do something that only you and God know about. And no matter how hard it is for you not to tell somebody, don't do it. Just keep it as your little secret with God and smile about it. He saw you. That's good enough. Practice confession. If you have bitter envy or selfish ambition, or if there's anything else stirred up in your heart today, take some time with God and take care of that. Receive the grace and the forgiveness of Jesus that he wants to offer you. And lastly, pray for it. Pray that God does a deep work of transformation in your heart. This isn't something that can be manufactured. It's something that the Spirit will produce in your life over time, and it's a process. I'm going to close this in prayer, and I thought today to do that, I'm just going to read the passage over us today as a way to offer a prayer for all of us, okay? So let's pray. Well, Jesus, we want to take your invitation that says, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. So God, we need your help. And would you fill us with a spirit of wisdom and understanding? Would you help us to show this by living a good life for the sake of other people? Would you help us to live meekly, gently, humbly? And God, for the bitter envy in our hearts and for the selfish ambition in our souls, we ask, God, that you eradicate that in our life, that we would turn from it, that we would desire your righteousness, your purity, your holiness inside of us. God, I pray that you would protect us from the temptations of the world, from the temptations of our flesh, from the temptations of the devil that so much want to steal, kill, and destroy the life that you have for us. God, give us a wisdom that comes from heaven, that is pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. God, help us to be your kind of peacemakers who sow peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. In your strong and mighty name, amen.